The lab printout from my annual physical sat on the kitchen table that morning, and I was looking at one number, my LDL, which had come back at 118. My doctor had marked it with a check mark. Fine, nothing to worry about. I had seen similar numbers for going on a decade, and every year the conversation was the same. Your cholesterol looks okay, keep doing what you're doing, see you in 12 months. What nobody told me was that while that LDL was sitting in the acceptable range, another number on that exact same piece of paper was quietly telling a different story. A number I had walked right past every single year. A number nobody circled, nobody explained, and nobody mentioned had a target range worth knowing about. What nobody knew at the time was that this overlooked ratio, sitting in plain sight on a standard lipid panel, was more closely linked to insulin resistance and cardiovascular risk than the number they had been watching all along. And the math to calculate it is something you learned in second grade. Here is what I have come to understand in the years since. There is no money in teaching you to divide one number by another on a piece of paper you already paid for. The 10-minute visit does not have time for it, and the supplement industry would rather sell you something with a complicated label than walk you through a free calculation. My name is Wayne Ellison. I am 68 years old. I am not a doctor, and this is educational, not medical advice. After a scare in my early 60s, I started reading the actual studies and clinic handouts myself from sources like the American Heart Association and the Mayo Clinic. This is what I found. Today, I want to show you what this ratio is, where it sits on your current lab report, what the research says about the target range, what pushes it in the wrong direction, what I changed in my own eating to move it, and the exact words to use when you bring this to your doctor by name. Nothing here requires a new test. All of it comes from blood work you may already have. How does someone walk out of a decade of annual checkups thinking everything is fine and still have a ratio that was quietly pointing the other way? The answer starts with what is already on the paper. Stay with me through the fifth thing on this list. It is the one I almost left off the video. My own doctor admitted he almost never has a patient come in asking for this specific number by name. When I brought it up at my last appointment, the conversation went somewhere I did not expect. Number 1. The ratio itself and where to find it right now. A standard lipid panel, the kind your doctor orders when checking your cholesterol, comes back with 4 numbers: total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, and triglycerides. Those 4 numbers are almost always there. What the report almost never tells you is what those numbers mean in relation to each other. The ratio I am talking about is your triglyceride number divided by your HDL number. That is the whole calculation. If your triglycerides came back at 150 and your HDL came back at 50, you divide 150 by 50 and you get 3. That is your ratio. You can do it on your phone calculator before your next appointment. Triglycerides are fat particles your liver makes from excess calories, particularly from sugars and refined carbohydrates. When you eat more than your body uses at a given moment, the liver packages that surplus and sends it out into the bloodstream as triglycerides. HDL is what most people call the good cholesterol, and that label is actually useful here. HDL particles work like a cleanup crew. They carry fat and cholesterol particles back from the bloodstream to the liver to be processed. Higher HDL generally means a more efficient system. When the ratio of triglycerides to HDL is high, 2 things are happening at once. There is more fat circulating than the system is efficiently clearing. And the research, including work cited by the American Heart Association, associates a high ratio with insulin resistance, which is the condition where your cells become less responsive to insulin's signal to absorb glucose from the blood. That connection to insulin is important, and I will come back to it. How to find this on your paperwork. Look for the line marked triglycerides, usually right below LDL on the printout. Find your HDL. Divide the first by the second. Write it down. The limitation here is that this ratio is one data point among many, and your doctor knows your full risk picture better than any single number can capture. But knowing your own number before you walk into the appointment changes the conversation you can have. Number 2. What the target range looks like and what my number was when I first checked. The research literature does not have a single universal cutoff, but the threshold that appears most consistently in published cardiovascular studies is a ratio under 2 being associated with lower risk. Some research places an even better range at 1.5 or below. A ratio above 3 shows up more frequently in research involving people with markers of insulin resistance and higher cardiovascular risk. As of 2026, these thresholds are the reference points that many cardiologists use alongside a patient's full clinical picture. I want to be clear, I am describing what research associates with these ranges, not what your doctor will tell you is your personal target. Your doctor has your full history, your medications, your other lab values. Those are two different conversations. When I first calculated my own ratio from a panel I already had sitting in a file drawer, I was above 3. I had been walking out of annual appointments thinking my cholesterol was fine because my LDL was in range. But the ratio had been pointing the other way for years, and nobody had ever mentioned it. That was nobody's fault. That was a 10-minute appointment with 15 numbers on a page and no system for walking through every calculation a patient might care about once they know to ask. Understanding that is part of what changed how I approach my own health. For years, everything looked fine on the one number I had been watching. That did not turn out to be the complete picture. Number 3. What drives the ratio in the wrong direction? This is the part of the research that surprised me most, and it is the part that changed what I put on my plate. The American Heart Association has published extensively on the relationship between triglycerides, HDL, and insulin resistance. The connection works in both directions. Elevated triglycerides combined with low HDL are associated with insulin resistance, and insulin resistance is associated with elevated triglycerides and lower HDL. The two reinforce each other. Here is the mechanism as I understand it from the clinic materials. When you eat refined carbohydrates or foods with a lot of added sugar, your blood glucose rises. Your pancreas releases insulin. When cells respond normally, the glucose gets absorbed. When cells have become resistant to that signal over time, the glucose stays elevated longer, and the liver converts more of that excess into triglycerides. At the same time, as triglycerides in the blood go up, HDL tends to go down. The two move in opposite directions. A diet high in refined carbohydrates can push the ratio the wrong way from both ends at once, triglycerides climbing while HDL drops. That is not a typo, by the way. For years, I had been watching my fat intake because I thought that was what affected cholesterol. The Mayo Clinic's patient materials explained clearly that for many people, carbohydrate intake raises triglycerides more directly than fat intake does. I had no idea. Nobody had mentioned it in any of those 10-minute visits. You would think that connection would have come up somewhere over a decade of annual panels. It never did. But here is the detail that everyone missed at the time, including me. The biggest driver of this ratio is something you adjust every day. Genetics play a role, and age plays a role, but the variable with the most room to move is what lands on your plate on a regular basis. Before I get to the specific changes I made, if you have a lipid panel somewhere in your files right now, go pull it out and do that calculation. Drop your age and your ratio in the comments below. I read every one. It helps me know what to cover next. Number 4. 3 specific changes I made to move the number. I want to be clear up front. These are changes I discussed with my doctor before I started making them. I am telling you what I did as an anecdote. Your doctor decides what applies to your specific numbers. Your doctor may have different guidance based on your medications and your specific numbers. Talk to your doctor before you change anything, especially if you are on medication. The first change was reducing refined carbohydrates and added sugar. I pulled back on them, rather than cutting them out entirely. I switched from white bread to whole grain bread, with the grain listed as the first ingredient on the label. I cut out most of the packaged crackers and low-fat snack foods that had been part of my evenings. Those low-fat options often replace fat with sugar and refined starch, and reading that in the Mayo Clinic materials changed how I looked at what was in my cabinet. This one change alone took about 6 months to show up in a meaningful way on my panel. I am not going to pretend it happens fast. The direction changed, and that was what I was tracking. The second change was adding cold water fish twice a week. The American Heart Association states that omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA, found in fish like salmon, mackerel, and sardines, are associated with lower triglyceride levels. I moved from eating fish maybe once a month to twice a week as a main protein. Usually salmon or canned sardines, which are inexpensive and easy to keep on hand. One flag on this. If you are considering omega-3 supplements rather than food, have that conversation with your doctor before you start, especially if you take blood thinners or any cardiovascular medication. The food form does not carry the same interaction concerns. I eat the fish. I have not added any supplement without checking first. The third change was adding more soluble fiber. The Mayo Clinic notes that soluble fiber, the kind found in oatmeal, beans, lentils, and certain fruits, is associated with improved triglyceride levels and supports healthy blood sugar. I started eating plain rolled oats most mornings with walnuts and blueberries. Not the flavored packets, which tend to carry a lot of added sugar. Just plain oats and a handful of simple additions. It looks like a small thing. The cumulative effect on my panel over 8 or 9 months was not small. Up to that point, I had been managing my numbers the way I had always been told. Watch the LDL, watch the saturated fat. That framing was about to get a lot more specific. Number 5. The exact conversation to have with your doctor and what happened at mine. This is the one I said I would come back to, and I want to walk you through what happened because how you ask matters. I went to my next appointment with my last 2 lipid panels printed out. I had done the calculation on both of them, triglycerides divided by HDL, the ratio circled in pen on each sheet. And I said to my doctor, I want to ask specifically about my triglyceride to HDL ratio. Can we talk about where that number is and what a reasonable target looks like for someone with my profile? My doctor paused. Then she said she almost never had a patient come in asking about that ratio by name. She said she was glad I had asked. We spent more time on that one question than we had spent on my cholesterol in the previous 5 years combined. She confirmed what I had read. The ratio is a useful clinical signal that often gets overshadowed by LDL because most guidelines over the past several decades were built around LDL numbers. She said the research connecting TG/HDL to insulin resistance had been building for years. And she said that now that I was tracking it, she wanted to follow it with me. If you are wondering how that is even possible after 5 years of annual appointments, so is everyone else who hears this story. I am not telling you this to suggest I had found something my doctor had missed. She knew about this ratio. She just had no reason to bring it up in a 10-minute visit when I was not asking for it. Once I asked by name, the conversation opened in a way it never had before. If I had stopped after calculating the ratio that first time and never brought it to an appointment, this would be a very different story. Here is what to write down before your next visit. Ask your doctor specifically about your triglyceride to HDL ratio. Say those words. Ask where your number falls and what a reasonable target looks like given your overall health picture. That is the ask. You do not need a printed study. You do not need to argue with anyone. You just need to know what to call it when you walk in. If you already have a lipid panel from the last year, look for your triglycerides and your HDL. Divide the first by the second and bring that number with you. You will be starting from a specific place instead of a general concern, and that changes what your doctor can do with the 10 minutes. And no, I am not making any of that up. Let me bring this together. The triglyceride to HDL ratio is calculated from any standard lipid panel, triglycerides divided by HDL. Research published in cardiovascular journals associates a ratio under 2 with lower risk, with some studies suggesting under 1.5 is better still. What drives the ratio up is the same mechanism behind insulin resistance, a diet high in refined carbohydrates and added sugar over time. What helped move mine was reducing those refined carbs, adding cold water fish twice a week, and eating more soluble fiber from oats and beans. I did not need a prescription for any of it. I did not need a supplement regimen. What I needed was knowing what to ask about by name and then having that conversation with my own doctor. That last part is not optional. If you take blood thinners, statins, or any medication for your heart or blood sugar, please bring these changes to your doctor before you adjust anything. The foods I mentioned are generally well regarded in the research, but your medication profile adds complexity that I am not qualified to navigate for you. Write down the question. Bring it to your next appointment. The phrase to use is, my triglyceride to HDL ratio. Ask what your number is and what a reasonable target looks like for your overall health picture. If this helped, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. Drop your age and your ratio in the comments. I read every one of them. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourself, and I will see you next time. Before you go, if today got you thinking about your blood pressure numbers too, I put together a video on the one blood pressure figure I wish I had understood at 60. It is called The One Blood Pressure Number I Wish I'd Understood at 60. Ask your doctor about it. Tap it on the end card right now. Same kitchen table approach, and those two numbers together tell a much fuller story.